Questions for reflection. In our first reading, Miriam and Aaron began to resent the authority and leadership of Moses. That resentment came from the sin of pride. They speak against him. The Lord will have none of this. He said, "Listen to my words. If there's a prophet among you, I reveal myself to him in a vision. I speak to him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. To him my whole household is entrusted. To him I speak face to face, plainly, and not in riddles. And he sees Yahweh's form. How then could you dare to criticize my servant Moses?" They incur the anger of the Lord by committing the sin which is the root of all sin, the sin of pride. They also face severe consequences. However, at the intercession of Moses, asking the Lord to show mercy, the Lord softens the consequences. How do we respond to those people who speak the Lord's word to us, even when we do not want to hear it? Do we recoil out of pride, or do we listen? In the responsorial psalm for today's Holy Mass, David the psalmist shows us the antidote to pride, true repentance. He cries out, "I was born guilty, a sinner from the moment of conception." We are called to be joyful penitents, always aware of our sin and grateful for the Lord's mercy. As Catholic Christians, we have the wonderful sacrament of confession. How often do we avail ourselves of this gift? Our gospel for today's Mass is taken from the 14th chapter of the Gospel of St. Matthew. Not only is this account of Jesus walking on the sea to rescue his disciples and reaching out to Peter a physical miracle and an historical account, it has a spiritual lesson for each one of us. We can miss a real encounter with the Lord if we think that this account is only about Peter and the disciples, something distant, which happened over 2 millennia ago. This story is meant for you and me, for the here and now. We live much of our daily life in the fourth watch of the night, at the time just before daybreak, at the end of a night which seems like it will never end. The Jewish people, living under Roman rule for so long, had adopted a number of Roman practices. The Roman practice of dividing the night into 4 watches or divisions of 3 hours was one of those practices. This was particularly important for those engaged in nautical activity. The 4th watch was between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. Our daily lives seem to be lived in the midst of tumultuous waves of struggle. We are often filled with fear and crippled as a result, unable to see the Lord right there on the horizon of hope. This story shows us the way to overcome fear through faith. It invites us to live differently, to walk on the waters of daily life by dynamic, living faith. It's also important to always try to place these wonderful gospel accounts within the context from which the passage for the gospel reading of the day is taken. The disciples had just returned from experiencing the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves. They had seen the Lord take what little bread that they had, multiply it, and give it back to them so that they could feed the very crowd they had suggested be sent away. They knew that he was able to work miracles and that they had been invited to participate in this extraordinary act of love by simply giving the little that they had. And after it was all over, they even collected up 12 baskets full. Now, he just wanted to pray, to commune with the Father. So he placed them in the boat, which the early Christian fathers saw as an image of the church, the new ark of the new covenant. It was the 4th watch of the night, the last hours right before dawn. And that 4th watch always included the darkest hour. The winds and the sea raged, and they became horribly afraid. Their fear was so crippling, they did not even recognize him as he came toward them. They thought that the Word incarnate was a ghost. "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." He spoke with such reassurance and tenderness. How often do we live our lives in the fourth watch of the night? Our fears so cripple us that we're unable to even recognize the Lord, the one who's always there, always coming to guide us on his way. He invites us to respond in faith as well. And when we do, faith helps us to overcome our fear and to walk into freedom. And that's what we see happening with Peter in this wonderful account. He responded in faith to the voice of his Lord. And when he kept his eyes focused on Jesus, he was able to do what seemed to be impossible. When he walked by faith, he walked into the freedom that comes from Jesus, the Lord of the winds and the sea. We live our lives now in Jesus Christ, and we are to learn to be at home in the boat of the church. We can always find him in the fourth watch of the night if we choose to respond in faith. And when we turn our faith into a verb, we too get our sea legs, as they say in the nautical culture. We also learn a new way of living and a new way of loving. Fear simply becomes a field of choice, an occasion for trust. Even in the fourth watch of the night, there's a bridge between fear and freedom. It passes through Jesus, who tells all who will fix their eyes upon him, "Take courage, it is I. Be not afraid."